and most renowned Secretary of the Department of Atomic Energy. Next person who came was Sarabhai, and he already said the program has slipped very badly. We have to now it slipped. In 1970, he was already saying it slipped very badly. We have to provide a new atomic power station of 500 megawatts every year after 72. Okay, so in 70, he's writing every year after 72, we'll build one. In fact, the first one came on 35 years later. Okay, so every year. Okay, now there are two such plants. Okay, fine. So then, even in the short run, Anil Kakodkar, for example, in 2003, he said, this is just very short run predictions, not predictions for 35 years. He said in 4 years, we will reach 6,800 megawatts. In fact, we have still not reached 6,800 megawatts in 12 years. Okay, we are still at 5,700. In 4 years, in fact, it should be 4 years, but 8 years. After 4 years, the capacity was only 4,070. So it was much lower than what was promised. They wanted to go up from 2,800 to 6,800. And even in the short term, there are problems with what the Department of Atomic Energy says. And so one should be very careful when one views these things. And there are many such examples. You can keep going through the history. For example, in 84, the DAE launched this profile saying we'll produce 10,000 megawatts by 2000. There are always these catchy phrases, 10,000 megawatts by 2000, 20,000 megawatts by 2010, whatever. So, for example, M.R. Srinivasan, I mentioned it earlier also, he said nuclear energy constitutes about 3%, but we'll increase it to about 10% by 2000, because he's writing 89, and we're going to implement this 10,000 megawatts nuclear energy program. Okay. So, of course, when this 1999 came around, this program was audited. The Controller and Auditor General produced a report. He said, the Controller and Auditor General report said actual generation of power under this profile was nil. Okay, in spite of the expenditure of 5,000 crores. And this is the CAG's report. Okay, this is not something we made. So in fact, what was produced was nil under this profile to increase nuclear capacity by this large part. This figure of 3% is actually very important. This is the data for the past 25 years. Okay, so this is from 1991 to about 2014. I didn't have data for the last year. You have to look at nuclear energy generation as a fraction of total energy generation. If you go look at the annual reports of the Ministry of Power, you can easily compute this fraction, and it's very steady, between about 4% to about 2%. So it oscillates about 3%, and it's just very stable. It's been stable at about 25 years. So nuclear energy provides a very small portion of electricity, and it's been like that for a long time, and it's likely to continue that way. And given the large costs of this, it's just easier to find other alternatives. Okay, so I think this curve is an important curve to keep in mind whenever people say, we should nevertheless do something to have nuclear energy, and nuclear energy is so important for the country's electricity. It's actually not. It's been very steady at 3%, and 3% is very small. You can do that by implementing some conservation measures. Okay, so let me just summarize. I'm done, and I think the summary is as follows. See, the Indian government has, the things I'd like you to keep in mind is that the Indian government is committed to importing some very expensive reactors. The previous government made this commitment, the new government has followed this policy very beautifully. And the process in which these contracts were awarded has been rather arbitrary. One doesn't know why 6 were awarded to France and 4 to Westinghouse, or 4 to GE and 6 to Westinghouse. Some number was decided, who knows how. Second, the government passed a liability law which takes away the rights of people first to get compensation, or to sue the supplier or even the operator. And at the insistence of the industry and of foreign governments, the government has been trying repeatedly to sabotage this law, the previous and the current government. And this is an effort that's been on for several years. Okay. Now I think the question I'd like to leave you with, and I'll stop here, is why is it that successive governments follow these policies which are clearly poor and don't make sense from an economic perspective or from a justice perspective. So I don't have much to say, but I think it's important to think about what this says about the workings of the Indian state. Okay? So there are all sorts of pulls on policymakers. There are pulls from multinational corporations, from foreign governments. There are pulls from domestic corporations, and of course, there are the needs that people have. And I think just as since this is a class and since this is a public policy audience, I think it's very interesting to try and look at this issue, not only because it's intrinsically important, but because it gives a very clear indicator about how the government functions. All governments face these kinds of pressures, and you have to see, and this policy I think makes it very clear, it hardly requires any stating, which are the pressures and which are the interests that the Indian state privileges. And it's very clear that the way they order these things is that they first privilege the interests of multinational corporations, then they privilege the interests of domestic corporations, and then the issue of what people's needs are come at the end. And this is not a matter of rhetoric. These statements are sometimes made rhetorically, but this is the place where you can analyze and see very clearly that these are the priorities of the Indian state. And I think that's one reason why, even from a very broad public policy perspective, this issue of nuclear energy is important. Okay, so I'll stop here.